pals, I'm here today to talk about 15 books on my TBR that I'm really excited to read. So I recently did a video where I recommended some of my favourite novels that all happen to be dark and twisty literary thrillers. And yeah, I had a blast doing that video and putting together all the list of the books because yeah, I loved all those books. And I find that when I read kind of dark and twisty books with a mystery element that are also literary fiction, so slow focused with lots of character development and beautiful writing, I just inhale them and just absolutely love reading them. So a couple of people asked if I have any other books like that on my TBR, and I do. I'm forever looking into more books to add to my TBR, which is completely unnecessary because I have way too many books already on it. But yeah, I have 15 here to talk about, and yeah, you'll notice some common themes that keep cropping up in a lot of these books that I enjoy reading about. So I'm going to crack on with the books. Actually, before I crack on, I will just mention how I found out about a lot of these books, because I think a lot of these are maybe less well-known books from indie publishers and not always published in the UK. So what I tend to do is I use Storygraph to track my reading, and I also use Everand, which is a North American audiobook and ebook provider, and I have a monthly subscription. And I find particularly over on Everand, when I listen to an audiobook, they recommend books below that are similar, that they think readers of that first audiobook will like, and that's really useful. But what's even more useful is they categorise each book into a few different categories. So it might be something like domestic thriller or like murder mystery, and you can click on each of those categories and find more books. So what I did to find a lot of these books is I looked at books I'd loved and then sort of clicked on the categories and went through like every book in the category. And yeah, this is then that list of books that I really like the sound of. And then there's also a couple of books in here that I did hear people review over the years, thought sounded brilliant, so they have made their way onto my list. So the first one is Cat Step by Allison Irvine. I think this came out a couple of years ago from an indie press in the UK. I'm sure I saw a couple of people haul it, but I don't think I've seen anyone review it yet. I know my library has a copy of this, and I actually saw it on a bookshelf a few weeks ago, and I had way too many books out, so I didn't borrow it, but I hope to soon because I have managed to get my library borrowing under control for once. And yeah, I really like the first few pages. The premise of this is that we're following this woman who is uprooting her life and moving to a small Scottish town with her 4-year-old daughter because she wants to sort of start a fresh life. I always find that a really interesting concept. I like that you find out more about their past and what they're running from, and I always like books set in kind of small towns, and I love Scotland. The premise of this is that one day she runs into a shop and she leaves her 4-year-old daughter sleeping in the car, and she thinks nothing of it, but something happens which the blurb doesn't spoil, and police and social services become involved and everybody sort of turns against her. And it says that this is about judgment, intergenerational relationships, community, class, and the expectations that we place on mothers. All those things I'm really interested in. I really liked the first couple of pages, and I felt that this book opened with an immediate sense of tension. And what I really like about reading these types of books is that kind of building tension, that building dread, and you keep turning the pages really quickly because you want to know what's going to happen, but you're also kind of dreading turning the pages quickly because you don't really want to find out how dark this can get, and I have a sense that this is going to build that really well. Then we have Service by Sarah Gilmour, and I have heard a couple of people talk about this one, and I think it sounds really intriguing. So the premise of this is from 3 perspectives. One is a famous male chef, one is his wife, and the third is a waitress who used to work in his restaurant. He is accused of a sexual assault, and from the moment of that sexual assault, you see it through each of their eyes. His perspective is he feels completely wrongfully charged. He just feels like he is this completely innocent man and that everybody's slandering him. Then you see from his wife's perspective, and you understand that she's put up with quite a lot from him over the years, and she's starting to question whether she should keep standing by him. And then this waitress is having to look back on her time working with him, to look at it with a fresh perspective and to start to question whether some of the ways in which he acted were actually acceptable. And I think this is one of those really interesting sort of post-Me Too novels that asks that we re-examine things that in the past we thought were acceptable, or at least thought we had to accept because men thought they were acceptable, and having to look at these things through a fresh lens, and sometimes perhaps not wanting to, because re-examining them means that we have to look at ourselves perhaps in a light that we don't want to, perhaps look at ourselves as a victim when we don't want to see ourselves as a victim. I think this sounds really interesting. I love a novel with multiple perspectives, and I also like a novel when there's this kind of accusation at the heart of it. The third one is Little Rot by Kweki Emezi. I'll actually be reading this one in the next couple of weeks because it is our August book club pick for my Patreon. If you are not aware, I have a Patreon. I upload 4 videos a month, and you pay however much you want to pay, starting at £1 or $1, going up to £10 or $10, and you have access to all 4 videos regardless of how much you pay. One of those videos is a book club video where I do a spoilery discussion video. One is a currently reading video. One is a video where I talk about what I DNF'd in the previous month. And one is a video where I speak about what TV and film I watched in the previous month. And I've been watching a lot more films lately, so that's been really enjoyable. And there's also access to a Discord channel where we chat about lots of different bookish things, which I very much enjoy. So if you are not a supporter of my Patreon and that's something you're interested in, I'd be really grateful if you would have a look at it down below, because it helps me be able to make more of these videos. So the premise of Little Rot is that we follow these 5 characters over one weekend in Lagos in Nigeria. It says that we get to look at the city's underbelly, and my understanding is that a couple of things happen between these 5 people, one of them being, I think, a breakup, and they all end up interacting with one another in the sort of nightlife of Lagos. This is set a lot in nightclubs, and it says this is a whirling journey through the city's dark side, told through the eyes of 5 people, each determined to run from the twisted powers out to destroy them. I like that this is a fairly vague blurb, and I don't really know much about where this is going to go, but it sounds kind of unsettling. I don't think I've read many novels that take place predominantly in like a nightlife setting, which I think I'll really enjoy, and I think is an interesting setting for this type of novel, because it's usually when people are at their most sort of raucous, drink or drugs are involved, and people do things that they'll perhaps regret the next day. And I think it will be interesting to see where this one goes. The next one is The Newcomer by Laura Elizabeth Willet. I haven't read any of this author's novels. I think she has 3 or 4, and all of them sound really interesting to me. And all of them kind of have dark and twisty kind of literary thriller vibes, but this one I think the most. She's an Australian author, and I think a couple of her books are set in Australia, but this one is actually set on a sleepy Pacific island, which I like the sound of. We follow this mother. Her daughter's body, her daughter's 29, is discovered, and she had a bit of a rocky relationship with her daughter, but she is consumed by wanting an answer as to who killed her daughter and what precisely happened. So this becomes a police investigation, and it says every man on the island is a suspect, yet none are as maligned as Paulina, and that's the daughter, the captivating newcomer known for her hard drinking, disastrous relationships, and for walking alone. Now, I think this sounds like a really good atmospheric setting, which is something I always love. And with a lot of these books, you'll notice that they kind of examine the relationship between male violence against women and the way women are perceived. In particular, when there is a crime against a woman or a woman goes missing, how they are portrayed afterwards, whether they're portrayed in this kind of angelic light, this kind of untouched victim, or whether actually there's questions about the innocence of this woman and whether she asked for it, or whether she is partly to blame for doing things, for example, like walking alone. So I'm really interested in this. Just want to try this author's work. So I'd love to know if you've read any books by Laura Elizabeth Willet. The next one is The Schoolhouse by Sophie Ward. I haven't read any novels by this author, but I think one of her previous novels, at least one, was longlisted for the Booker Prize, and I remember lots of people raving about it. Now, a couple of things I want to comment on here. One, I have a few novels that are like school or college settings, and I think those are really interesting settings for these type of books because they can be quite closed off and quite insular, and so I think they can make for a really claustrophobic and kind of unnerving location for this type of story to unfold. And the other thing is that I noticed when I was looking up a lot of these books, they have quite low ratings on Storygraph. And I think a lot of the time, these type of books are really hit or miss with people. I think sometimes a lot of readers go into them expecting them to be really plotty and pacey, because that's what we come to expect from mysteries, because that's what we get in genre fiction. Because actually a lot of the books I spoke about in that recommendations video didn't have the best kind of average rating on Storygraph, but I still loved them. So I'm still willing to give these books a chance. I'm going to read the blurb of this one because it's not too long and I don't think I can paraphrase it better than this blurb does. It says, Isabel lives an isolated life in North London where she works at a nearby library. She feels safe so long as she keeps to her routines and doesn't let her thoughts stray too far into the past. But a newspaper photograph of the missing local schoolgirl and a letter from her old teacher send her spiralling and bring back the trauma of what happened years ago when she was a pupil at the Schoolhouse. The Schoolhouse was a 1970s experimental school where the usual rules did not apply. Life there was a dark interplay of freedom and adventure, violence and fear. It was there that Isabel learned that some truths should never be revealed. But try as she might, the truth is coming for Isabel, and everything and everyone she has tried to protect are now at risk. It says this is a masterful and gripping thriller about truth, silence and the weight of the past. I think that sounds really eerie and unnerving. And yeah, I'm really interested to see where this one goes. The next one is These Women by Ivy Bachoda. Again, this came out a few years ago and I remembered hearing some really positive reviews for this one. I think out of this set of books, this may be one of the darker ones, so perhaps one to look into trigger warnings for. It says that this is set in West Adams, a rapidly changing part of South LA, and they're referred to as these women. These women on the corner, these women in the club, these women who won't stop asking questions, these women who got what they deserve. And we follow 5 of these women who do not know each other, but they are all linked by one man who obsessively stalks them. Some of them are aware of his presence and some are not. But it says that the careful existence they have built for themselves starts to crumble when 2 murders rock their neighbourhood. As I've said many times, I love multiple perspective novels. I love hearing from women's perspectives. I love the fact this is looking at, these women and kind of examining the way that society look at women like this and kind of criminalise them and blame them for awful things that may happen to them. And yeah, I think it will be interesting to look at, a really close look at a community I don't really know about, this neighbourhood in South LA, and I like when I get to know a place from multiple perspectives. I think that'll be really cool. Then we have 4x4 by Sara Misa. This is translated from the Spanish, I think, by Katie Whittemore. So this is set somewhere called Wybronny College. I don't know if that is a real place, so let me know if it is. If you are American, I'm pretty sure this novel is set in the US. It says it is an elite school for the wealthy. 4x4 is a novel of insinuation and gossip, which sounds delicious. One of the scholarship students goes missing and it becomes clear that all is not well at Wybronny and that something more sordid lurks beneath the surface. The second part of this novel, after this student goes missing, is written by an imposter who has infiltrated the school as a substitute teacher. This is compared to Shirley Jackson's writing. It is described as a gothic nightmare and a social thriller. So I think that sounds amazing. Like I said, I really like school and college settings, and I like novels that play with form. So I like the fact that this is a novel of 2 halves. The first half where you sort of get this mystery and you don't know any of the answers, and the second half where perhaps you do get the answers but not from the perspective you want them from. I think that sounds, again, like it could be quite sinister and unnerving, and I'm definitely up for that. Then we have Bitter Orange by Clare Fuller. Now this is an odd one for me to put on the list because I've read Clare Fuller's first 2 novels, which are Our Endless Numbered Days and Swimming Lessons. I didn't enjoy Our Endless Numbered Days very much, and I liked Swimming Lessons, but not anywhere near as much as I hoped I would. So I haven't read any of her subsequent novels, of which I think there's been 3 or 4, but I love the sound of all of them. So I'm going to give her another chance, and this novel just sounds like completely up my street, and I think I will audiobook this one because I checked, and yeah, the audiobook narrator sounds great. This is set during a summer, and so I'm definitely going to try and read this one over the next few weeks while we still have a bit of a heat wave here in England. This is set in 1969 in a dilapidated English country mansion, which is one of my favourite locations to read about. We're following this woman who lives in the attic of this crumbling mansion, and there is a peephole in her attic through which she can watch the inhabitants of the flat below her. In the flat below her, this couple live, and they are beautiful and mysterious, and she becomes kind of obsessed with them. As well as watching them through the peephole, she actually gets to know them personally and starts to spend all of her time with them. But she starts to realise that perhaps not everything about this couple is as it appears. It says, boundaries between truth and lies, right and wrong, begin to blur. Amid the decadence, small crimes bring on a bigger one, a crime so terrible that it will brand their lives forever. Yeah, I can't believe I still haven't read this one. This one's been out a few years, and again, I remember hearing really positive reviews, and it just sounds like a book I could love. Then we have Cleen by Alia, Traco, Zaran. This is translated from the Spanish by Sophie Hughes. This is a Chilean novel, so this one is set in Chile. And this is about this family where I think the young girl has died and the family's maid is being interrogated. She must tell the whole story before arriving at the girl's death. It says that she's worked for the family for 7 years. She's cooked their meals, cleaned their floors, washed their dishes, kept their secrets, and been aware of all their fights and feuds. And she has decided to take a vow of silence when she's accused, and this novel is her breaking that vow to go back to when this all started and to tell the story leading up to the girl's death. It says, is this a story of revenge or a confession, class warfare or a cautionary tale? Building tension with every page, Cleen is a gripping, incisive exploration of power, domesticity and betrayal from an international star at the height of her powers. I really like domestic novels. Again, quite a few of these novels look at the idea of power and control, and again, they're things I'm really interested in. And yeah, I really like the idea of hearing about the interior life of this family from their maid. Then we have Foster Dade Explores the Cosmos by Nash Jenkins. I think this is probably the chunkiest book I've got on the list. I think this one is around 500 pages and over 20 hours on audio, which may be the way I go with this one. So this one has quite a long, complicated blurb, so I'm going to try and do it justice. It says, this is a novel about a tragic scandal at an American prep school told in the form of a literary investigation through a distinctly millennial lens. This young man called Foster Dade arrives at this elite private school in 2008. He gets involved in this friendship group, but then something happens 18 months later and he's expelled following this tragic scandal that leaves the school and its students irreparably changed. Our nameless narrator inherits Foster's old dorm room and he begins an epic years-long investigation into what exactly happened. Through interviews with former classmates, Foster's blog posts, playlists and text archives, and the narrator's own obsessive imagination, a story unfurls. Foster's, yes, but also one that asks us who owns our personal narratives and how we shape ourselves to be the heroes or villains of our own stories. It says this is a novel about privilege and power, the pitfalls of masculinity and its expectations, and most distinctly, how we create the mythologies that give meaning to our lives. It brilliantly captures the emotional intensities of adolescence in the dizzying early years of the 21st century. Now, I think this one could be really hit or really miss. I love the idea of being consumed by this really big novel that's kind of piecing together the mystery with you and it being in all these different formats. I feel like this is one that I could completely inhale. I'm also aware that I listened to a sample of this one on Audible and it is very wordy, I think going to be really pretentious, and so there is a chance that I just find this way too irritating and it doesn't work for me at all. But it's making me think a little bit of The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis, which I've been toying with reading, but I feel like I'll end up in the hate camp with that one. So yeah, I don't know if they're similar novels at all, but I feel like there's more of a chance that I could love this one. And I just feel really compelled by it. So I would love to know if any of you have read this one. Then we have Things Don't Break on Their Own by Sarah Easter Collins. I actually have this one waiting for me at the library to go collect in the next few days. This one is about two sisters. One day, one of them starts the walk to school and the other one follows shortly behind. One of them arrives at school and the other one doesn't. In the ensuing years, everyone believes that the missing sister must have been murdered. But the remaining sister doesn't believe that. In fact, she's sure that that is not the case, and she's sure that her sister is still out there. That's as much as the blurb reveals, and that's kind of as much as I want to know, because I think it sounds really yeah, really intriguing. I don't think this has like a fantastical element. I don't think this is anything about this sister being psychic. Yeah, so I think this could be one that really examines the idea of victims being portrayed in this really angelic light and maybe that not always being true, and how when someone becomes at the core of this kind of missing persons case or murder case, they kind of become flattened and we know a lot less about them. They become much less complex than they actually were when alive, and what that's like for the people who actually remember them and the people who actually knew them. And so yeah, I think this one sounds like it could be, yeah, really juicy, and I just have no idea where it's going to go, so I'm very excited to get to it. Then we have a novel by Catherine Hernandez. Catherine Hernandez is a Canadian author who I'm convinced I will love and adore. Her novel Scarborough is on my 5-star predictions, and I'm hoping to read that one very soon. I'm not sure if that's how we pronounce it, because we have a place called Scarborough in England and that's how we say it, but Canadians, correct me if you say it differently. I think you may say it Scarborough, let me know. So this new novel is called Behind You. It came out quite recently and I love the premise of all of her novels, so you just want to get hold of all of them, but they're not actually published in the UK. They're quite pricey and quite difficult to get hold of, but I will get myself a copy of this. I'm going to read you the blurb again because this is quite complex and it's kind of inspired by real events, so I don't want to misspeak. As terror grips a city, a young girl faces danger closer to home and chilling memories that last a lifetime. Behind You is inspired by a horrifying chapter in Canadian history and follows fictional characters terrorised by a fictional perpetrator. Alma is a Filipino woman who works as a film editor for a cheesy true crime series featuring the most notorious killers of the 20th century called Infamous. On the surface, she seems to live a good life with her wife Nira and teenage son Mateo, but there is so much left unsaid. It's not until Infamous's last episode features the Scarborough stalker that she remembers coming of age while the serial rapist and killer was attacking women and girls in Scarborough in the late 80s and early 90s. What unfolds are two stories. In the past, young Alma watches an entire city become consumed with a manhunt for an elusive, terrifying suspect, while she herself is in jeopardy from closer to home. In the present, adult Alma must come to terms with her own ideas of consent to stop her son's dangerous behaviour towards his girlfriend. Weaving back and forth in time, Behind You is a moving story of one girl's resilience into adulthood and a chilling portrayal of the insidiousness of rape culture. It daringly turns the whodunit genre on its head by asking the question, who hasn't done it? As in, who has not been complicit in sexual harm? So I think this is going to be a really difficult to read book. I think this one will perhaps be, I don't know, like I was going to say a bit more plotless than the rest. I don't know if I mean that. I think this one maybe will have less of a mystery at its core and will be much more an examination of these topics, which I am really interested in. I'm really pleased to see that more and more novels and non-fiction books are kind of examining these topics. And like I said, with a lot of these books, what we're looking at is post-Me Too movement, how our views on lots of things have changed, and also how we have to re-examine our own memories and reframe them with this new perspective. And I think all that is deeply fascinating and complicated and allows us to have quite difficult to like characters sometimes, and that's something I really enjoy reading about. Then I have We Meant Well by Iram Shazia Hussam. So I think this one was longlisted for, I think, a Canadian prize, and that's how I heard about it, because I think this is from quite a small press. The premise of this is we're following this wife and mother as she lives in somewhere in the US, I'm not quite sure where. She gets a phone call from her colleague who is working overseas, and he tells her that he has been accused of a sexual assault by a young girl who is attached to the charitable organisation that they work for. And he asks our protagonist Maya to fly over on the next flight and to try and help defend his name because he denies doing anything. I think this novel sounds really interesting and quite different to a lot of the others, because what this novel is actually examining is these type of charitable organisations who set themselves up and say they're there to help people, but actually end up being there to govern them, and the massive power imbalance between those people, between the people who are giving aid and those receiving it, and what happens when this sort of accusation occurs. And in the blurb it says that this novel forces Maya to confront the privileges she gets from working in a third world country and how she can live there in luxury whilst being seen as being a wonderful person because she works for this charity, and how perhaps she will lose some of those privileges if she actually speaks up for the people she claims to protect. So I think this one sounds really kind of crunchy and complicated and nuanced, and yeah, I'm very interested to see where it goes. Then the last couple I recently featured on my summer TBR video, which I'll link above, so again, hoping to read these ones very soon. The first one is Spoiled Creatures by Amy Twigg. This is a fairly new release. This is set in an all-women's commune in a rural location in the Kent Downs. All those things sound amazing to me. And we follow this woman called Iris, who decides to join this woman's commune, I think perhaps with her young daughter, and to sort of start this new life. She quickly becomes enthralled, perhaps obsessed, with the woman who leads the commune, and yeah, gets really wrapped up very quickly in this woman's life, and begins to realise that maybe everything isn't quite as perfect at this commune as she first thought, and actually there's kind of a lot of infighting about who's in charge, which is something I find really interesting in kind of like cult commune novels. It says that this novel is about transgression, sisterhood, and the seductive nature of obsession. It pulls back the skin of patriarchal violence and examines the female rage that lurks beneath. I think this is going to be one of those novels that builds and builds and builds, and then has perhaps quite a violent, epic ending, which is something I very much enjoy. And yeah, I love rural novels. I love novels that are focused on lots and lots of women. And yeah, I think stories about communes are just absolutely fascinating. So really interested to see where this one goes. And then lastly, we have The Girls in Queens by Christine Candic Torres. This is another one of those novels that is multiple perspective and dual timeline narrative, which I love. So we follow these two young girls who grow up together in Queens, and they are best friends. They are always attached at the hip, and yeah, have this wonderful relationship together. One of them starts to date a local sort of golden boy athlete from their school, and they become kind of a trio and are all really good friends. Many years later, as adults, these two women are still best friends but are no longer involved with this man, and he contacts them because he has been accused of a sexual assault, and I think he wants them to be like character witnesses to speak up on his behalf and to say that he could never have done this sort of thing. Now, one of the women, his ex-girlfriend, stands by him and believes that he can't have done anything like that. And the other woman actually starts to question herself, to question her version of events, to re-examine the past, and to consider what she owes to the person who's accused him. And it creates a massive rift between these two women. I think that sounds fascinating. I love coming of age novels. I love novels about girlhood and intense friendships. And I think the idea of these two women being kind of fractured by something a man is being accused of is deeply interesting to me. So I can't wait to read it. So those are the 15 novels on my TBR, and I would love to say I'll have read all of these by the end of the year, but we shall see. Do let me know if you've read any of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them, be they positive or negative. And of course, let me know if you have any books on your TBR that I've missed. I got quite a few recommendations in the recommendations video I did, which I've looked into and have added to my list. I decided to feature all the books I was already aware of in this video, just because they're kind of top priority for me. But I have added all the ones that were recommended to me that I hadn't previously read or DNF'd. So yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on these books. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.